Plant horror is a largely overlooked and quite frankly great subgenre that I'm disappointed doesn't have more recognition. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Terror of the Vervoids, Little Shop of Horrors. The idea that Mother Nature as you know it can suddenly turn on you and drag you into the mud as it eats away at your flesh. That's why you don't eat vegetables, kids. Day of the Triffids is arguably John Wyndham's best and most recognisable work,
the only one that comes close being the Midwich Cuckoos,
which you may better know of as its filmed adaptation, Village of the Damned. Day of the Triffids was originally released as an abridged serial called Revolt of the Triffids in 1951 editions of the American journal Collier's Weekly from the 6th of January to the 3rd of February. Triffids was also the first he published under his pseudonym Wyndham, which was a good choice on his part. It's a very cool sounding nickname. I feel like everyone knows the story by now. Killer plants known as Triffids escape their farming facilities where they've been foolishly used for their precious oils despite their sentient and violent nature, and when a mysterious comet shower causes 90% of the population to go blind, Bill Mason, a Triffid biologist and one of few not to go blind, embarks on a journey to survive the plant apocalypse, meeting many friends and enemies along the way. The original novel has many post-World War II themes and fears of the secret power of the Soviet Union in the 1950s, with society's obsession with improving itself through various scientific means leading to our own downfall. Well, what happens when you take that setting and update it to a contemporary 1980s one that expands on the allegories for society and class? You get a pretty kick-ass BBC One thriller that, while a little rushed due to the limited 6 times 25 minutes per episode, is arguably the best and most faithful on-screen adaptation of Wyndham's work. There's a lot more rich history behind the novel in mainstream media, but we'll get into that a little later. Wyndham's work, perhaps for practical reasons, was rarely adapted for television prior to Triffids being commissioned. As previously discussed, Dumb Martian was adapted as the backdoor pilot to Out of This World in 1962, which is lost. A Long Spoon was adapted as an edition of Storyboard titled The Long Spoon on Friday, 18th of August 1961, which is also lost, and 2 of his stories were adapted as editions of Out of the Unknown, the first being on Monday, 4th of October 1965 in No Place Like Earth, and on Tuesday, the 11th of February 1969 in Random Quest, the latter of which is also missing from the archives. His work became much more widely known because of radio plays, adapting numerous stories such as Triffids, The Kraken Wakes, The Trouble with Lichen, Dumb Martian, and Chucky. The BBC finally became interested in producing a televised version of Day of the Triffids in 1979 when controller Bill Cotton decided that the work should be turned into a television drama. Head of drama Graham MacDonald offered the producer's role to Blake's 7 original producer David Maloney,
who accepted seeing as production on the 3rd season of Blake's was coming to an end.
Since Maloney was devoted to Wyndham's work and knew the novel well, he was the perfect choice to adapt it faithfully. When Blake's 7 completed its spring run in 1980, Maloney moved straight to working on Triffids. On Monday, 20th of August 1980, Maloney commissioned Douglas Livingstone to write 6 26-minute episodes serialising the novel into a television show for delivery by Friday, 30th of November that same year. Livingstone had been employed by the BBC since 1963, working on shows such as Play for Today and Sextet, creating the sitcom Born and Bred,
adapting both Esther Walters and Clayhanger,
and contributing episodes to series such as Budgie and Public Eye. It also helped that Maloney knew Livingstone from when they were both actors in 1958, and it was Livingstone's idea to update the setting to a contemporary 80s one instead of making it a 50s period piece. While the serial does have some changes to the story, it plays out pretty much the exact same as the novel and is far more faithful than the 1963 film version. The original choice to direct the serial was Peter Cregan, known for his work on Out of the Unknown, Hadley, Menace, Colditz, Wings, and The Sandbaggers. Bill Cotton originally stalled the project in 1979, however, because he believed that a co-finance production needed to be sorted out to give the show a better budget. Of course, Maloney had still left Blake's 7, but due to Triffids' hiatus, he instead produced the 4th season of the period class drama When the Boat Comes In. By 1980, the Australian Broadcasting Corporation, a long-time affiliate of the BBC, agreed to a deal concerning Triffids. American cable company RCTV was also interested in purchasing the serial for broadcast. When production went ahead as planned, the only unfortunate outcome was that Cregan was no longer available, so Ken Hannum was chosen to take his place. He was, and you could argue still is, a well-respected Australian director with an invaluable reputation in the industry, handling episodes of The Troubleshooters, Paul Temple, Colditz, Luke's Kingdom, and the thriller serial The Assassination Run, as well as landmark Australian cinema such as Sunday Too Far Away
and Break of Day.
He was also known for rehearsing his actors over and over and over and over and over again, so Maloney had a lot of confidence in his skills. Hannum's attention to detail was so firm that he only filmed 3.5 minutes worth of footage every location shoot, wanting to value quality over quantity. Steve Druitt was in charge of the effects department, having worked with Maloney on Blake 7. Having also worked in the National History Museum, he was inspired by various poisonous and parasitic plants he had encountered in his years there, and he and the crew wanted to make the look of the plants as faithful to the original sketches as possible. He crafted the first maquette of the design over an Action Man toy he had lying around. It's a funny image. The look of the Triffids was also inspired by ginseng root and cast in latex, with sawdust and sisal string alongside actual plant roots added for texture, with a clear gunge coated on the flexible rubber head that was originally supposed to be fiberglass before being deemed too rigid. The way they were operated is really cool. Each 8-foot Triffid was a 5-foot woody bowl in which the operator was driving it around in a go-kart with a fan to keep them cool installed into the fiberglass neck. The stumpy Triffid roots that make those creepy clicking sounds were controlled electronically. Maloney was concerned about the props initially, but he was convinced Hannum would make it work, which he did.
John Duttine, who Maloney had previously cast in a 1970s episode of Z-Cars called Fairground,
was hot property after starring in John the Evangelist in ITC's The Legend of Nazareth, and the lead role of schoolteacher David Powlett-Jones in the BBC One period serial To Serve Them All My Days. He was contacted on Wednesday, 18th of February 1981 in regards to working on the show as the star between Monday, 23rd of March to Saturday, 20th of June. In the supporting role of Joella Jo Payton, instead of Playton, as in the original novel character's name, Emma Ralph was contacted on Wednesday, 11th of March. Daughter of film director Michael Ralph, this was an early role for the actress. The third actor cast was Maurice Colborne, who played Coker, having previously starred as Klein in the offbeat Birmingham BBC drama Gangsters.
Elizabeth Sladen, lovingly remembered for her role as Sarah Jane Smith, was apparently offered a part in the show, but for whatever reason, she was never cast.
And the rest of casting is history. Like, literally, I couldn't find any more casting information anywhere. Film rehearsals began on Wednesday, 25th of March, with location shooting on 16mm film taking place from Monday, 30th of March to Friday, 1st of May. In London, a limited amount of filming was done at 5 in the morning on a Sunday in Trafalgar Square. A still sequence was also undertaken, although the Triffid props took passers-by who didn't see the BBC film cameras by a hell lot of surprise, almost as if the plant invasion was truly happening. Other filming locations in the city included the Putney Emergency Hospital, which was out of use at the time, Camden Lock, Islington, Senate House and Library in Central, and the Goldsmiths Estate in Acton. Locals and businesses were very cooperative with the BBC crew, especially since the crew put very polite letters through their letterboxes requesting permission to film undisturbed. During the filming of a sequence where a Triffid plant is buried in Bill's childhood garden, the prop didn't ignite safely as expected, instead flaring up like a bomb that charred the fence and threatened to burn the shed down. Richard Cox asked the owner of the house for some water, she gave him a bowl full of it, and he hastily extinguished it by splashing the target directly, leading to an applause for his quick thinking, and no need to call the fire brigade. Other locations included a farm along the road between Pulborough and Billingshurst, the 19th century Sedgwick Park owned by an eccentric family who kept wolves and pythons as pets. Jesus Christ. Climping Beach, and an unopened bypass road, used to represent the abandoned roads that the characters often drive on. The weather was not enjoyable for the BBC crew, with the sequence in the truck requiring the rain to be muffled by lining the truck with blankets to drown out the sound of the downpour. Sounds like a fucking nightmare. The title sequence was shot on 35mm film and used quantized colour levels in stark relief against a black background. Douglas Bird created it, someone who had very notably worked on The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy that same year, using a similar technique of filming with lights shot through water. Unfortunately, he died during production when a small plane he had built crashed during a flight. Christopher Gunning composed the eerie title music, although most of the serial was backed by stock music for its soundtrack, with Susan and Bill even singing Yellow Submarine at one point. Before the 1981 serial of Triffids was broadcast, it was preceded by an abridged reading of the novel prepared by Doherty and Astile for Women's Hour on BBC Radio 4, read by David Ashford, recorded in July 1980 and broadcast from the 28th of August to the 16th of September that same year. As I mentioned before, there are plenty of changes in the serial from the book, but this isn't a comparison piece, so I'll leave it there and mention some differences later on as we go through the episodes. Triffids was broadcast on Thursday nights at 8:30 p.m. from the 10th of September to the 15th of October 1981, an appropriate time slot given its closeness to Halloween. The episode's viewer count peaked at 9.6 million viewers for Part 2, and were as low as 4.5 million for Part 5, opening to a respectable 8.5 million for Part 1, and finishing on a very respectable 9.3 million for Part 6. It received a respectable appreciation index, with viewers as young as 12 and 13 complimenting the show as having a truly gripping story and encouraging them to read the book. Some viewers didn't find it to be all that scary, but others still felt the horror content and atmosphere made for great television, being described as much more horrific and scary than the 1962 film. It was called a load of tripe by some people, and also called the death of teleplays by others, but what can you expect? It's the British public, come on. They just want to go to the pub. Public? That was awful, moving on. The serial was repeated for the first time on Wednesday nights between the 14th of March and the 11th of April 1984 on BBC One. It has been rebroadcast on UK Gold in 1996, 2004 and 2005, on the Sci-Fi Channel in 2006, and on BBC 4 in 2006, 2009 and 2014. It's available to stream on Pluto TV as of 2024 and is available on a high-quality DVD with an amazing booklet to accompany it. A Blu-ray was also released on the 7th of September 2020, featuring a full remaster of the original film elements, as well as some tweaks on the cheap-looking videotape. The narrative has an interesting beginning where Bill Mason, blinded and in hospital, records a cassette tape for his co-worker and friend Walter, who he works with on a Triffid farm and is planning to write a book about them, fearing they may have some form of intelligence that humans have not yet discovered, even if they've cut them open and found no brain. Bill decides he's had enough and wants to retire from the position, desiring love and living on a farm away from society. Hoping he will never have to think about the accursed creatures ever again, he goes back to the early days, revealing that a shady businessman named Palaguez discovered the Triffid seed possibly sourced from bioengineering in Russia, and the bizarre vegetable oil they contain that he supposedly sold for $10 million and a percentage of the profits.
What they...
Bill's recording is temporarily interrupted by a strange glass smashing sound, but he brushes it off and continues his story, recounting his first experience with a Triffid. Bill theorised that someone stole the seeds and they spread throughout the earth unnoticed, and Bill and his father became the first people to encounter and grow one in the back garden. Triffids had already become something of a pop culture phenomenon, being shown in cinemas in a comical fashion, but he didn't find it so funny. While his father was initially fascinated by the plant, he promptly destroyed the thing when it stung Bill, almost blinding and killing him with its toxic poison. When it was discovered that Triffids were flesh-eating carnivores that waited for their poisoned prey to decompose before consuming them, many of them were eradicated and the species was almost exterminated permanently. But when scientists discovered the value of the oil they produced, they decided to breed them in farms, but unknown to them, you can never fully tame a wild creature. In a slight panic, Bill interrupts his story when he hears the bells chime 8, panicking when nobody answers his button pressing because his bandages are supposed to be taken off. He resumes his cassette, recalling how Walter told him of his fears that the Triffids could talk to each other and perhaps even think, making them a potential threat to human safety. He starts to hear odd noises coming from the hospital hallways, fearing something has happened as no one even comes to check on him or give him breakfast. Bill then recalls the comets from the night before that he was so jealous to have missed, including his encounter with the very level-headed and intelligent Dr. Soames. Having decided that it's been too long, Bill takes the risk and removes his own bandages, only to discover the hospital has seemingly been abandoned. When he encounters a scared and angry Dr. Soames, he is now blind. And the Triffids have escaped, killing Walter in the process. Since Part 1 very nicely sets the scene, Part 2 introduces us to the real horror of the story. A quick recap and we realise that not only is Soames blind, but the entire hospital staff and patients have also been blinded, one of which fell out of bed and died as a result of no one being able to see or help him. To make matters worse, when he returns to the office, he finds Soames has fallen out of the window. Whether it was suicide or a blind accident is left unclear, which is pretty dark. While Bill wanders around, a young blonde named Jo who can also see drives off into the city trying to find a doctor for her father, who has become blind as well. Her car breaks down and she is harassed by a blind couple before an older man supposedly saves her. Instead, he pins her against her car, points a switchblade at her and claims her as his guide. This dynamic kind of reminded me of Jabba the Hutt and Princess Leia, a young bombshell being forced to be some fat creature's chained up plaything. It's really disturbing, and it sets the tone for the rest of the story perfectly. The degeneracy of humanity really is unrivaled. Bill at first experiences a slightly less dark side of the epidemic, encountering a blind couple with a daughter who can see. Their son is on a trip to France, leaving the three of them to wait out the catastrophe without him. It's a really sad and slightly dark scene where the dad, John, tries to convince Bill to stay and guide them as he comes to terms with the fact that no one is coming for them. It's a brilliant scene with great dialogue and an excellent performance from Stephen Yardley who, I'll just say it, appeared in a great role in my favourite Sixth Doctor story, Vengeance on Varos on Doctor Who. The connections between Doctor Who and every other BBC show from this era is unfathomable. Bill decides to abandon the family in hopes that he can try and help everyone else who is blind and vulnerable, but John tries telling him he can't, they're better off sticking to a small group, and that the offer is always on the table to come back.
You come back. If you're still alive, then.
Not even 5 minutes later, Bill gets his own taste of the sexually horrific and violent side of humanity just as Jo has, witnessing a group of mostly blind, drunk Arsenal fans led by a single-sighted one interrupt a store robbery and make advances on an innocent blind girl. Bill tries stepping in but is brutally assaulted, in a twisted way proving John's point as the girl is raped off-screen. This is followed by a hauntingly beautiful scene where a bruised and battered Bill hears a woman singing in the nearby church in the park before she starts to cry, suggesting she may be blind and took refuge there. While walking around, Bill hears Jo being attacked and frees her from her kidnapper.
Get off him.
Pull on that hard!
They get to know each other in a pub where they narrowly avoid being discovered by more nasty-sounding blindies. Jo tells him what she was doing and explains that she was asleep after a night of drinking with friends, effectively missing the comet shower. In the original novel, she's a popular author, but in the serial, she's a seemingly ordinary 23-year-old who used to drink a lot and lived at home after her mother died, I guess to make her more relatable. She's a nice person, and Bill's in roughly the same boat, only he has no family or lover, so he decides to go to her house with her in a stolen car. I'll touch up on the convenience of that in a minute, don't you worry. They find Jo's dad and their maid brutally killed by a Triffid stinger, with the Triffid in question stalking and eventually attacking them. Bill manages to resist the stinger either due to his immunity, or the venom being drained from the recent attack. Or both, I guess. So he kills the creature with a pitchfork and they escape, witnessing more Triffid murders on their route. To make matters worse, they get blocked by an abandoned food truck being raided by the blind, who hear the car and menace it as Bill tries to kind of stupidly escape through the tiny gap between the truck and the houses.
Get him out. Might be more than one.
Get him out.
Get him out. Get him out.
We want him.
Out, you bastard. Out. Out.
Get him out. Get him out. Get him out.
In a genuinely creepy opening scene thanks to its unnerving angles and the performances of the blind attackers, the third part sees Bill cleverly trick the blind as he and Joe escape the vehicle, finding another car that's conveniently had its keys left in the ignition. This is what I'm talking about. They just seem to find abandoned cars, which is kind of funny. It would have made more sense if they just made some passing comment about Bill knowing how to hotwire earlier in the serial, but whatever. I guess you could say it makes a dark implication that someone who could see was perhaps brutally dragged away from the car by a Triffid or the blind bandits, perhaps even by the Arsenal gang. Or someone became blind while driving the car, abandoned it, and got attacked by someone, or a Triffid. You know what? That makes a weird amount of sense. Some parts of the sequence as they were originally written in the script were changed for practical reasons. The carnapping originally took place amongst a massive crowd near King's Cross Station, and we would see the duo stock up on things such as knives, food, and weapons. The duo instead do all of that and find a high society flat off-screen, where Bill is working on an anti-Triffid gun while Joe prepares dinner without any cutlery to eat it with, lighting a candelabra she lifted without him realising as a nice gesture. Bill presents a bottle of wine,
Although they have an awkward exchange because of his wording, which is pretty funny.
After discussing their personal lives and whether they think anyone will come to help, Joe notices a light flashing, suggesting other people are thriving out there. They fall asleep in the same bed because Joe can't sleep with all the riots and gunfire going on, cementing their survivor's bond. The danger of the Triffids is further emphasised in a pretty much unrelated scene where an old blinded farm couple are killed by one of the creatures. It's pretty scary stuff and it's shot beautifully in the nighttime.
Tom?
Bill and Joe come across what appears to be a military zone that is resisting the entry of a group of blind people led by a man named Coker, who actually lifts the stupid general's gun and demands to be let in. The blind is shot at and scatter, but Bill and Joe are allowed in on account of the fact they can still see, and are sent out to gather supplies such as food and water, while Bill is insistent they need weapons to fight the Triffids with. Michael Bealdy, one of the heads of the colony, humours Bill but doesn't buy into the Triffid danger as well as he should. Just as all seems to be going well, the leaders present this pretty twisted, almost cult-like theology that they need to pair people up, have babies, and live in a certain male-dominated fashion where the men have multiple wives, and anyone who disagrees is free to leave. In the original novel, Dr. Vorlus was an elderly man, but this was changed to make her an attractive some 40-year-old, because such an outrageous idea was deemed better coming from a woman's mouth to appease the 1980s audience. While Bill and Joe aren't keen on the idea, sticking to the philosophy of strength in numbers, they ultimately agree they'll be going with the group, making the promise that the two of them can be together as they finally embrace. That night, however, there is a fire in the building, and Bill, trying to put it out, just knocks himself unconscious. When he wakes up, he's been handcuffed to a bed in a cell-like room.